I wasn't the loudest one in the family. I wasn't the favorite either. I was just the one who picked up the phone when no one else would, the one who showed up with a casserole when things fell apart, and the one who quietly covered the bill when the numbers didn't add up, not because anyone asked me to, at least not at first, but because somewhere along the way I became the person everyone quietly counted on, and I never learned how to say no to people I loved. My name is Elise. I'm 32 years old. I'm a project manager for a mid-sized logistics company in Charlotte, North Carolina, and I make decent money. Not rich, not trust fund comfortable, but stable. The kind of stable that, in a family like mine, might as well be a flashing sign that says available funds, please apply within. I have one younger brother. His name is Derek. He's 28 and charming in the way that people who've never had to work very hard are charming. Easy smile, quick laugh, the ability to walk into any room and immediately make everyone feel like he was the person they'd been waiting for. Growing up, he was my mother's soft spot, her gentle project. When he struggled in school, it was a phase. When he bounced between jobs in his mid-20s, he was still finding himself. When he borrowed money and forgot to pay it back, it was just Derek being Derek. I loved him anyway. I genuinely did. I still do, in the complicated, exhausting way you love someone who has never once stopped to consider what they cost you. This story starts about 14 months ago, when Derek told us he was finally getting serious about his life. He had a plan, he said, a real one. He'd been dating a woman named Piper for about 8 months. She was sweet, organized, the kind of person who color-coded her planner and remembered everyone's birthday. The plan was that they were going to open a small dog grooming business together. Piper had experience, Derek had enthusiasm. All they needed was startup capital. My mother called me on a Thursday evening. She didn't even say hello before she started. Derek has a real opportunity, Elise. He just needs a little help getting started. I asked how much. She paused. $6,000. I was standing in my kitchen making pasta. I set the wooden spoon down on the counter and looked out the window at the neighbor's oak tree for a long moment. Mom, that's not a little help. You have it though, don't you? And there it was. Not can you help, not we'd really appreciate it. Just a quiet, confident statement of assumed access to my bank account. You have it though. As if my having saved money meant it automatically belonged to the family pool. I want to be honest here, because I've thought about this a lot since then. I didn't say no. I didn't even push back very hard. I asked a few questions. Would there be a repayment plan? What did the business plan look like? Had Derek spoken to anyone at the Small Business Administration? And my mother answered each one with a version of, he's really serious this time. And this is different. You'll see. I agreed to $5,000, not 6, 5. I told myself it was an investment in my brother's future. I told myself it was just money and family was more important. I wired the money on a Saturday morning and tried not to think too hard about the fact that I'd been saving that money toward a down payment on a condo. Derek texted me a thank you with 3 exclamation points and a dog emoji. Over the following months, I watched the business sort of materialize and sort of not. There was a logo, there was an Instagram page with 11 posts. Derek mentioned Elise on a small commercial space. But every time I asked about it directly, the subject changed. Piper, from what I could tell, was doing most of the actual work. Derek was doing most of the actual talking about the work. My mother, to her credit, seemed cautiously hopeful. My father mostly stayed out of it, which was his approach to most things involving Derek. He'd learned a long time ago that engaging fully only led to arguments, and arguments only led to my mother being upset with him, so he perfected the art of nodding and leaving the room. Last October, about 9 months after I wired that money, Derek called me on a weekday afternoon. I was eating lunch at my desk. He launched in without preamble, which was also very Derek. No warm-up. No checking if this was a good time. Just full speed ahead into whatever he needed. Hey, so the grooming business is kind of on pause. I put down my fork. What does on pause mean? It means we're reassessing. The lease was more than we thought, and Piper and I are actually taking a break right now, so, Derek, what happened to the money? Silence. And then very casually, it went toward expenses. Startup stuff. You know how it is. I didn't push him further that day. I should have. Instead, I said okay and asked if he was all right. And he said yeah, totally. And we hung up and I sat in my office for a while staring at my lunch. What I found out later, much later and not from Derek, was that a portion of that money had gone toward what my cousin Adrian quietly described as some gambling stuff he got caught up in for a while. Online sports betting, specifically. Derek had apparently had a rough stretch of it, lost more than he won, and had used startup funds to cover the losses before anyone noticed the books didn't balance. I didn't know any of that in October. I just knew the business was on pause, and I was $5,000 lighter. In November, my mother started planning her 60th birthday party. She wanted a real celebration. She'd talked about it for years. A 60th was significant, she said, a milestone. She wanted a venue. She wanted catering. She wanted a photographer. She'd even found a place she loved, a private event room at a restaurant about 20 minutes from my parents' house in Mooresville. She showed me the website during Thanksgiving. The rental fee alone was $1,200. The catering packages started at $45 a head and she wanted to invite 60 people. I sat at her kitchen table while she pulled up photos on her iPad, and I did the math quietly in my head. Venue, catering, photographer, cake, decorations, invitations. We were looking at $5,000 to $7,000. Conservatively. Mom, I said. Had you talked to Derek about helping pay for this? She waved her hand. He's going through a hard time right now. I know. I'm the one who funded the hard time. She looked at me with that particular expression she had. Not quite hurt, not quite annoyed, somewhere between the two. I just thought, since you're doing so well, I'll help plan it, I said. And I can contribute, but I'm not paying for the whole thing. She nodded like she agreed. I should have gotten that in writing. By January, I had booked the venue on my credit card because the date she wanted was filling up and she needed to hold it. I told myself I'd be reimbursed. I coordinated with the caterer, chose the package, confirmed the head count. I found a photographer, a young woman just building her portfolio who charged $800 for 4 hours, which was a genuinely good deal. I designed the invitations in Canva and had them printed at a local shop. I drove over one Saturday and spent 4 hours with my mother going through table linens and centerpiece ideas. I wrote a detailed spreadsheet with every expense, every vendor, every deposit. My total out-of-pocket by early February was just under $4,000, with another $1,800 still owed at the event. I want you to understand that I did all of this willingly. I want to be clear about that, because what happened next is so much worse if you understand that I wasn't waiting for a thank you every step of the way. I was doing it because I loved my mother. Because 60 is significant. Because I genuinely wanted the party to be beautiful. The text came on a Thursday night in late February. I was sitting on my couch watching TV. My phone lit up with a message from Derek. Not from my mother, from Derek. Hey. So Mom wanted me to tell you that she's been thinking about the party, and she's worried about you and Aunt Carol drama. You know how you two get. She thinks it might be better if you're not there. She's really sorry. She loves you. She just wants the day to be peaceful. I read it twice. I set my phone face down on the cushion next to me. Then I picked it up and read it a third time. Aunt Carol and I had a disagreement at Christmas 3 years ago. A disagreement that, for the record, began when she made a pointed comment about my relationship status and I told her, calmly, that I'd rather be single at 30 than miserable at 60. It lasted approximately 4 minutes. We haven't had any conflict since. I go out of my way to be civil at every family gathering. The idea that I was some kind of threat to the atmosphere of my own mother's birthday party was so surreal I genuinely laughed out loud in my empty apartment. And then I stopped laughing. I called my mother. She didn't pick up. I called again. Still nothing. I sent her a text, Mom, Can you please call me when you get a chance? I'd like to talk about what Derek said. She responded 2 hours later. I love you, sweetheart. I just want everyone to have a nice time. You understand? No. I did not understand. No. I did not understand. I put my phone down and I sat with it for a long time. There's a particular kind of grief that comes from realizing that the people who were supposed to be on your side fundamentally do not see you as a full person. They see you as a resource, as a role, as a function. And when the function isn't needed anymore, when the party is already mostly planned and mostly paid for, suddenly there's an old argument with Aunt Carol that apparently makes your presence inconvenient. I pulled up my spreadsheet. $4,012 already paid. Another $1,800 owed. Events scheduled with a venue, a caterer, and a photographer. All coordinated, all confirmed, all under my name and in most cases my credit card number. I've thought about what my mother had said in October when I first hesitated about paying for the grooming business. You have it though, don't you? I opened my email and I wrote to the event coordinator at the restaurant. I told her there had been a family emergency and I needed to cancel the reservation. She was sympathetic and walked me through the cancellation policy. I would lose the deposit, which was $400, but the remaining $800 from the venue hold would be released since we were still outside the 30-day window. Then I emailed the caterer. I explained there had been a change of plans and the event was canceled. Because I had booked and paid the deposit directly, the refund would come back to me. Then I texted the photographer and told her the event had been canceled due to a family situation, apologized for the inconvenience, and asked if she'd like me to refer her to anyone who might need a photographer in the spring. She was gracious about it and said absolutely no worries. Then I opened the group family text, the one with my parents, Derek, my aunt and uncle on my dad's side, and my cousin Adrian, and I pasted in a screenshot of my spreadsheet. Every line item. Every amount, every vendor. And below it I typed, since I've been asked not to attend, I've gone ahead and canceled all the arrangements I made and paid for. Happy to share vendor contacts if anyone wants to rebook. Love you all. I put my phone on silent. I went to bed. I want to tell you that I slept soundly. I didn't, not really. I lay there in the dark, running through every possible version of what would happen next, feeling the particular anxious weight of having done something that cannot be undone. I second-guessed myself 4 or 5 times before I finally fell asleep sometime after 2 in the morning. By the time I woke up, my phone had 63 notifications. My dad had called 3 times. Adrian had sent me a voice memo that was mostly her saying, "Oh my God," repeatedly. Derek had left a voicemail that started with, "Elise, come on, this is insane." My mother had texted 11 times, starting with, "Elise, please call me," and escalating by the end to, "I don't know who you've become." I made coffee. I fed my cat. I read every message carefully before I responded to any of them. What I learned, pieced together from various sources over the next few days, my mother had genuinely not understood what would happen. She seemed to have operated under the assumption that the money was a gift, that the vendors were handled, and that asking me not to come was just a logistical decision with no real consequences. The cancellation apparently hit her like a truck. The restaurant had called her directly because she was listed as the guest of honor, and they wanted to confirm the cancellation. She found out that way before she'd even seen my text. Derek, I found out through Adrian, had actually been the one to plant the idea about me being disruptive. He'd told my mother that Aunt Carol had said something to him at Christmas about dreading being in the same room as me. Aunt Carol denied this entirely when my dad quietly asked her about it. As best as anyone could reconstruct it, Derek had manufactured or, at minimum, wildly exaggerated the conflict to get me out of the picture, possibly because he didn't want me around asking pointed questions about the business money, possibly because he just found it easier when I wasn't there to notice things. I've thought about that a lot since. My father came to my apartment on a Sunday afternoon, about a week after the cancellations. He sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee and was quiet for a long time before he said, "I didn't know how bad it had gotten." I told him about the $5,000. I told him about the grooming business, I told him about Adrian's comment about the gambling. I told him about every vendor I had coordinated and every dollar I had tracked on that spreadsheet. He listened to all of it without interrupting. When I finished, he stared at his coffee cup. "I owe you an apology," he said. I told him he didn't have to apologize for Derek. "Not for Derek," he said. "For looking the other way for too long." We sat with that for a while. The party didn't happen. My mother, after the initial wave of anger, started trying to rebook things on her own, but the date she wanted was now gone at the restaurant, and several other venues she looked at were either unavailable or significantly more expensive. The photographer had already taken another booking. By mid-March, she'd quietly let the whole idea go, at least for this year. She told my father she'd try again in the fall, maybe something smaller. Derek texted me about 3 weeks after everything unraveled. It was a long text, longer than he usually sent, which told me he'd probably rewritten it several times. He said he was sorry, that he hadn't thought about what would happen, that he hadn't meant for it to go like this. He didn't mention the money. He didn't mention the gambling. He said he hoped I wasn't too mad, and that maybe we could get lunch sometime. I read it. I didn't respond for several days. When I did, I kept it short. I told him I appreciated him reaching out. I told him I wasn't trying to punish anyone. I told him that I'd spent a long time being available in ways that cost me a lot, emotionally, financially, in terms of my own time and plans, and that I was finally at a point in my life where I needed that to be different. I told him I loved him, and I meant it. I told him that if he ever wanted to actually sit down and have an honest conversation, I was open to that. But I wasn't going to pretend things were fine just to make the family comfortable. He hasn't responded to that text. It's been a few months now. My mother and I have a relationship. It's quieter than it used to be, more careful on both sides. She called me in April, ostensibly to tell me about a new recipe she'd tried, and we talked for 45 minutes about nothing in particular. Before she hung up, she said, a little stiffly, "I know I should have handled it differently." It wasn't quite an apology, but it was the closest she's gotten, and I accepted it in the spirit it was offered. I've thought a lot about what it means to be the reliable one. In a family, or in any group, there's almost always someone who quietly assumes the logistical and financial weight of things. Not because they're asked, but because they're capable, and because the people around them have learned that capability is a form of availability. I was that person for a long time. I still am, in some ways. I don't think I'll ever be someone who doesn't show up, who doesn't care, who isn't willing to do more than her share when it genuinely matters. But I'm learning to notice the difference between showing up because I want to, and showing up because someone has assumed I will, and to understand that those two things are not the same, and don't deserve the same response. My condo savings are almost back to where they were before the $5,000. I've been looking at listings in the No-Day neighborhood, close to work, near a coffee shop I like. I went to an open house last weekend and stood in the kitchen of a second-floor unit with good light, and thought, for the first time in a long time, about nothing except what I wanted. It was a strange feeling. It's going to take some getting used to. But I think I'm finally ready for it. I've spent a lot of time since last February thinking about cause and effect, not in some grand cosmic way, just in the plain, ordinary way that life actually works. You make choices. Those choices have weight. And eventually, the weight lands somewhere. Derek made a choice when he planted that story about Aunt Carol. Maybe he didn't think it all the way through. That's very Derek, actually, the not thinking it through part. But he made it anyway. And my mother made a choice when she let a text from my brother substitute for a real conversation with me, when she decided that keeping the peace meant keeping me out. Those were not small choices, even if they felt small in the moment. They were choices about who counts and who doesn't, about who gets considered and who gets managed. And choices like that have a way of coming back around, not as punishment, not as anything dramatic, just as consequence. The natural, logical consequence of treating someone like a utility rather than a person is that one day the utility stops being available. What I did, canceling the vendors, sending that screenshot, wasn't revenge. I want to be clear about that, because I've turned it over in my mind enough times to know my own motives. It wasn't about making anyone suffer. It was about refusing to absorb the consequences of someone else's decision. They decided I wasn't needed at the table. I decided I wasn't needed at the bank either. That's not cruelty. That's just honesty finally showing up at the same time as the paperwork. What I'd had to sit with, though, and this is the harder part, is my own role in building the situation. I didn't become the family ATM overnight. I became it slowly, through 100 small decisions to say yes when I could have said not this time, to cover things when I could have asked why it wasn't already covered, to let capability be read as consent. That took intelligence to recognize, and it took a while. Tracing back the thread to where it started, seeing clearly how a pattern forms not from one dramatic moment, but from dozens of quiet ones, that kind of self-examination is uncomfortable and necessary. And I think it's the most honest work I've done in years. The resilience part is simpler to describe but harder to actually do. You keep going. You don't let one family's bad math convince you that you're worth exactly what you contribute financially. You rebuild the savings account. You go to the open house. You answer the call from your mom even when you're not sure what she wants, because love is complicated and people are imperfect, and you can hold someone accountable and still leave the door open. That's not weakness. That's the decision to remain a full person rather than shrink into either a martyr or a wall. Elise isn't a cautionary tale. Neither am I. We're just women who learned, later than we would have liked, that being reliable doesn't mean being inexhaustible, and that the people who truly deserve your generosity are the ones who never once assumed it was owed to them. I think about that second-floor condo with the good light sometimes. I haven't made an offer yet, but I'm getting there.